So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this edition of the NITheCS Colloquium. Today it's a really big pleasure to introduce Professor Jonathan Blackledge, because many of you know him. Professor Blackledge was the DVC research at the University of KwaZulu-Natal and has also a professorship at the University of the Western Cape, so he's well known on the South African scene. Before I ask him to speak, let me briefly summarize his biography, and because it's a very, very long biography with many achievements. Professor Blackledge started his academic career with a diploma in plasma physics at Imperial College, followed by a PhD in theoretical physics from London University, followed by a doctorate in mathematics. And over the years, he published more than 300 papers and graduated around 70 plus PhD students. Yeah? He has a very rich career spanning academia, industry, and scientific civil service. In the year 2008, he was appointed as to the Stokes Professorship at the Science Foundation of Ireland. And after 30 years experience in defense-related science and technology and intelligence services, he retired from the UK Ministry of Defense as a colonel of military intelligence. Yeah? So that's really impressive, Jonathan. At the moment, he holds various professorships, including at the University of Wales, at the Institute of Advanced Studies of Warsaw University of Technology, the Technological University Dublin, the University of Western Cape, and of course also the University of KwaZulu-Natal, where he was for several years, as I mentioned, the Deputy Vice Chancellor for research. He's also a fellow of several institutes and society, including the Institute of Physics, the Institute of Mathematics and its applications, the Royal Statistical Society, the British Computer Society, the Institution of Engineering and Technology, the Chartered Management Institute, and the Institute of Directors. Yeah? And last but not least, in 2007, he was elected a fellow of the City and Guilds London Institute for his contribution to vocational education. And he's also a freeman of the City of London for his contributions to economics. So he's a well-rounded, almost Renaissance-like, all-round academic. Jonathan, we are really very happy to have you with us here this evening. And so are all the participants that joined us in large numbers. If you're ready to start your presentation, you are most than welcome to start. I will invite, the participants to use the Q&A facility to ask questions, and Ilya and I will moderate it. And maybe after the talk, if you raise the hands and there are not too many questions, we can allow you to ask your question in person. Yeah. So Jonathan, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Francesco. Let me just check you can see the screen and you can hear me fine.
Yes, all is good. Yeah, thank you very much.
Here we go then. Welcome to my lecture entitled Knowledge Economies and the Future of Higher Education. The lecture provides a personal view on the future of education, focusing on higher education in the United Kingdom. In this context, I will discuss the problems being faced in the UK university sector, how these problems have arisen, what needs to be done about them, and how the future of the UK's knowledge economy will be influenced by the strategies now being implemented by the UK government. This is done by revisiting some examples of problems from the past and how they were solved, lest we fail to appreciate the words of the Spanish-American philosopher, George Santayana. Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. I have been teaching and undertaking research in science, technology, engineering and mathematics, or STEM subjects, at universities based in the UK and many other countries for over 30 years. I have also worked for the UK Scientific Civil Service and in the commercial sector. This has included collaborating with the City and Guilds London Institute to establish industry-based training and apprenticeship programs. I was elected a Fellow of the City and Guilds London Institute in 2007 for contributions to vocational education. And I've been collaborating with this institute and Imperial College London as an advisor on higher education for over 10 years. It is in this context that I'm now taking the opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts on the future of higher education. In this respect, the presentation which I prepared and the script that I shall now read for the colloquium will take approximately 50 to 55 minutes. The background to this presentation relates to a series of lectures and panel discussions organized by the Institute of Physics in celebration of the 400th anniversary of Sir Francis Bacon's landmark publication, Novum Organum. The aim has been to revisit the work of one of England's greatest scientific philosophers in order to find possible solutions for the relief of our planet by learning something from Bacon's deep understanding of the human condition. The webinars are available through the link given in the current slide and form the basis of a new book to be published next year. In regard to my contributions to this webinar series, and with respect to this lecture, I published a paper in August 2021, which is part of a special issue on the COVID-19 impact on education systems and the future of higher education, details of which are given in the current slide. The paper presents the issues considered in this lecture in greater detail and includes an extensive list of references to qualify the points of view I present. The paper is available via the link shown. The contents of the lecture are presented in the current slide. I first wish to say something in regard to Francis Bacon's attitude to education, and then consider some comments on education made by other characters of historical interest. The reason for this is to set the scene in regard to the current problem with higher education in the United Kingdom. I will then consider some examples of historical consequence which reflect the radical changes that took place in English education and have a synergy with the situation we face today. In this context, I will discuss the evolving and necessary connectivity between government, education and industry, the so-called triple helix concept. This will be followed with a discussion on the future of higher education in terms of the underlying strategy of the United Kingdom government. It will be undertaken by considering two case studies that are reflective of the new age of the technological college that we are entering. Colleges that I believe are destined to replace many of the rank and file universities we have today. As usual, I will end the lecture with some concluding remarks and some final thoughts. In 1609, Sir Francis Bacon wrote a book entitled The Wisdom of the Ancients, which was a series of mythological fables. Embedded in these fables are the issues associated with the human condition, as contemplated by many of the great thinkers of past Hellenistic civilizations. For Francis Bacon, education was an indispensable aid to progress in society, including moral progress. His view was that education would lead to a greater body of the population that could, to quote, read, not to contradict and confute, nor to believe and take for granted, but to weigh and consider. Such views were, of course, the antithesis of his times, in which the belief systems of a strictly monotheistic society were a source of authority and control, and not to be weighed in the balance, but adopted as an absolute truth. In this sense, many of Bacon's philosophical ideas were nothing new, but part of the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment, based on the rebirth of Hellenism throughout Europe that was taking place in his time and continues to this day. When Francis Bacon entered Cambridge University at the tender age of 13, he said of his fellow students that they are like, to quote, "They are like becalmed ships that never move but by the wind of other men's breath." In other words, they were unable or just fearful of thinking for themselves. Perhaps this was, and still is, an inevitability when thinking outside the box often has a habit of getting one into trouble or worse. In Bacon's time, Europe was a tinderbox of anti-establishment thinkers, which were not welcome and often shunned by the very authorities who had cultivated their thinking power, and for that matter, had paid for their education. An iconic example being Martin Luther in the early part of the 16th century. In this context, the purpose of the lecture is to weigh and consider the state of higher education in the United Kingdom. This is undertaken using a framework that is characterized by 4 fundamental issues. They are as follows: educational philosophies, knowledge economies, ethics in educational provision, and the goals of education. Francis Bacon's most famous work is his Novum Organum. First published in 1620, this work concerns the interpretation of nature. It is a reflection of what Bacon said of science at the time, that, and to quote, those who have taken upon themselves to lay down the law of nature as a thing already known and understood, have therein done philosophy and the sciences great injury. Francis Bacon is considered to be the father of induction. He was the first to truly grasp the power of careful inductive reasoning to generate insights using experiments to prove or to disprove a theory. In his book, Novum Organum, he introduces the 4 idols of the mind and asserts that each of the idols prevents human beings from attaining a true understanding of things. His idol of the tribe is a tendency to treat human observation and reason as infallible, forgetting that all humans tend to distort what they perceive. The idol of the marketplace is the debasement of words and their misuse to generate propaganda, as we refer to it today, twisting words to obscure the truth. His idol of the theatre concerns the belief in dogmas and systems of philosophy that distort reality. Like a work of drama in a theatre, these systems are only approximations or models of the truth. In terms of education, Bacon's idol of the cave is very appropriate. This is the idol that concerns the individual human tendency to treat our own ideas as objective and not to take into account that all individual human wisdom is subjective and colored by one's own experiences. In this way, people tend to become blind to their passions and enthusiasms, their devotions and ideologies, which leads to a misunderstanding in the true nature of things. And this is where education plays such a vital role, by providing resistance to Bacon's idol of the cave. In the light of what I've just said, I will now introduce the first of 2 quotes relating to the remit of this lecture. The first is from Bertrand Russell, who is often referred to as the Lord of Reason, and rightly so, in my opinion. He was one of Britain's finest mathematicians and philosophers, and had a profound influence on the developments in artificial intelligence and analytical philosophy, for example, winning the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1950. Russell was also an outspoken social critic and a vehement advocate of freedom of expression, stating that we are faced with the paradoxical fact that education has become one of the chief obstacles to intelligence and freedom of thought. A second quote that underpins many of the views considered in the latter part of this presentation is from a very different source. In a book by James Boswell on the life of Dr. Samuel Johnson, first published in 1766, Johnson is said to have stated the following: "Talking of education, people nowadays have got some strange opinion that everything should be taught by lectures. I know of nothing that can be best taught by lectures, except where experiments are to be shown. You may teach chemistry by lectures. You might teach the making of shoes by lectures." While I disagree with Johnson that one can teach chemistry and the making of shoes by lectures, the point he makes is actually very relevant today and is a reflection of the transition that is now taking place. Instead of school leavers going to a university so that they can be lectured to, they are now being encouraged to enter earn-as-you-learn apprenticeships, where they can obtain the hands-on training required to develop a career. Bertrand Russell's observation that education is one of the chief obstacles to intelligence and freedom of thought is a reflection of the current problem. Johnson's observation that nothing can be best taught by lectures is a reflection of the solution. That is, and as will be discussed later, the development of new technological colleges in which student apprentices are properly trained by industry experts in subjects that are relevant to the economic development of the state. The problem with higher education is compounded in the cartoon given in the current slide. It is an icon of a situation that graduates of our universities are increasingly being faced with. There was a time when education focused on the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. Now we have a situation in which the 3 D's are prevalent: degree, dole, and debt. It is a quite scandalous realization that there is a steady flow of graduates going from a graduation ceremony straight into unemployment after, at least in the UK, having been burdened with an average debt of the order of £50,000 in student fees, accommodation, and other living costs. And this is more often than not for the privilege of being able to receive nothing more than a so-called Mickey Mouse degree, a phrase first coined in 2003 by the then United Kingdom Minister for Education, Margaret Hodge, as part of a discussion paper on the expansion of higher education. She referred to a Mickey Mouse degree course as one, and I quote, "where the content is not as rigorous as one would expect, and where the degree itself does not have huge relevance in the labour market, and that simply stacking up numbers on Mickey Mouse courses is not acceptable." That was nearly 20 years ago. In relation to the cartoon shown in the current slide, there is a fundamental moral issue to be considered in association with ethics in educational provision. This is whether it is ethical to treat young and vulnerable people in this way, and in effect, use their basic naivety to extract money out of them before they have even had a chance at earning a living. Moreover, what value can such graduates have in the development of a knowledge-based economy? It is quite literally a waste of a generation, prohibiting the contributions that they could make to society, and thereby creating a future for themselves and their children. This is a situation that has a synergy with a problem that occurred in England in the 1650s, as shall now be discussed. I beseech you, think it possible you may be mistaken. So said Oliver Cromwell, one of England's most enigmatic but influential politicians. This is a statement that we should endeavour never to forget, because it provides an intrinsic resistance to the faults that pervade society, encapsulated in the four idols of Francis Bacon, as briefly discussed earlier. Cromwell's influence and legacy is well known. However, given the remit of this lecture, there is an aspect of his contributions that is not as well appreciated as it should be. It is for this reason that his contributions to English education is now briefly addressed. After the English civil wars of the 1640s and during the Commonwealth of the 1650s, many radical changes took place. The most important and long-lasting effect of these is the Renaissance in English education. This is because control of education passed in every way from the church to the state. Calls for educational reform were inspired by a desire to improve the lot of the poor through a broad range of initiatives, including the provision of technological and agricultural education, a system of schools to educate all children, and more financial aid for deserving students. Before the 1650s, the English education establishment was a very insular and parochial enterprise. Consequently, Cromwell introduced a comprehensive range of new schools, colleges, and academies in which the sciences, technology, engineering, and mathematics took a precedent. Now, this caused considerable offence to the academic establishment at the time and was perceived as a form of subversive criticism. Their perceptions were in fact quite correct. Cromwell and his government were not at all satisfied with the education system that the new republic had inherited. He wanted school leavers and university graduates to be proficient in, for example, building ships, the art of navigation, in developing engineering practices that helped industrial outputs, as well as being trained for entry into the new model army and navy. In short, Oliver Cromwell set about transforming education in England to one that promoted the quest for reason, literacy, science, and industry. Thus, while many of the great scientific institutions, such as the Royal Society, were to be established later by his monarchist successor, Charles Stuart II, Cromwell seeded what later came to be known as the Industrial Revolution. This is a revolution that could never have come about had Cromwell not introduced a vision for English education based on the philosophy of Francis Bacon. In a nutshell, what Cromwell did was to drain the Whitehall swamp of his time and oxygenate the pond. And the better part of this oxygenation was the education of the land. And in his time, and for that period of history, that land was England. The most important and relevant thing to understand is Cromwell's strategy, which was not to confront, but to bypass the academic establishment of his time. This is precisely what is going on now. Moreover, it is a strategy that was implemented once again due to a similar situation that the UK finds itself in now. This occurred in the 1880s, as shall now be discussed under what I call the Bismarck Effect. In the 1870s, two major industrial competitors of the United Kingdom came to fruition in the form of the United States of America, just after the early 1860s Civil War, and the new state of Germany, proclaimed on the 18th of January, 1871, under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck, who was the first Chancellor of Germany until 1890. In both the USA and Germany, there were major initiatives to promote science, engineering, and technology in order to support the growth of these new nation states and develop their future prosperity. In the USA, this was driven by private enterprise and entrepreneurship, the icons of which include Thomas Edison and Alexander Bell, for example. But in Germany, central government was more proactive in the industrialization of the country, which was primarily centered, then as now, in Westphalia and Lower Saxony, areas of Germany that had ample natural resources for the production of steel, a material that at the time was the mark of an industrial nation state. Under the leadership of Bismarck, Germany flourished in the arts and the sciences and was set to becoming a major industrial and economic power, served by a progressive written constitution, a state education system with a broad curriculum, and a social welfare provision that was decades ahead of the UK for the time. Bismarck was in fact the first to establish a welfare state in a modern industrial society with the social welfare legislation of 1883. Now, all this German activity disturbed the status quo of the British establishment for similar reasons to those associated with the current emergence of China, which is disturbing the balance of an assumed normality dominated by the USA today. It led to the Great Depression of the 1870s, which severely compromised the dominance of the UK and caused many British scientists and engineers to seek employment overseas. Something had to be done. What was done is now discussed in the following slide. In a letter written on the 12th of June, 1899, from Queen Victoria to her eldest grandson, William II, Emperor of the German Empire, the Second Reich, she states the following: I never personally attacked or complained about Prince Bismarck, though I knew well what a bitter enemy he was to England and all the harm that he did. Why should, in a purely political sense, Queen Victoria call Bismarck a bitter enemy of England? After all, Bismarck was a great admirer of England. He spoke fluent English and was a scholar of the works of people like Francis Bacon and William Shakespeare, for example. It is because Bismarck represented a disturbance to the British comfort zone of the time. This always occurs with the emergence of a new order, especially when that order is based on competence. Victoria's letter was representative of the British establishment's attitude to Bismarck, one that was essentially predicated on fear. In order to help compete with the emerging German tiger and indirectly control it, the British establishment encouraged Kaiser William to oust Bismarck, which he did successfully, as given in the cartoon on the left-hand side of the slide. Now, in my opinion, this was a very, very big mistake. Replacing a progressive social and well-balanced political genius, such as Bismarck, with a traumatized Kaiser, just because he was a member of the European Club of unelected heads of state, may have cost the lives of millions in the century to come. Think how much richer the curriculum of our education establishments might be today had this blatant interference in the affairs of others not taken place. There was, however, another thing that the British establishment did, which was very important and a necessary initiative and a direct reaction to the Bismarck Effect. This was the development of a new educational centres for technical training, the most iconic of which was a centre established in South Kensington, London, which was called the Central Institute of the City and Guilds London. This institute is now known as Imperial College, which is one of the premier scientific, technical and research establishments in the world. I would say that because it just so happens to be the college I graduated from in 1980 after reading physics. Now, Imperial College has an interesting history in that after developing its technical training services as a city and guild centre, it joined London University in 1908, only to leave the university in October 2006. One of the underlying reasons for leaving was that it wanted to go back to its city and guilds roots. And it is these routes that many UK higher education institutes are now destined to grow from. This is because the Imperial College model is the embodiment of the triple helix model. The triple helix model is one that considers the interaction between university, industry, and government to be the key to innovation and growth in a knowledge-based economy. Although the phrase triple helix model is original, the concept is not. Moreover, while the concept continues to be debated by the executives in many UK and other universities, the underlying reality is that the majority of academics are not fit for purpose in regard to understanding the model, let alone endorsing it. But they could be, especially if they could learn to respect it rather than fear it, and because of this fear, hold it in contempt. The problem would, of course, be null and void if university academics had to have experience in industry for them to apply and be appointed to an academic position. Such a realization can make massively important impacts on society above and beyond the cloisters of the ivory tower. Let me now give you an example. In the 1920s, and working with his former PhD student, Leo Szilard, Albert Einstein became involved in a business venture. It was essentially a spin-off company from Berlin University, where he was working at the time. The focus of the business was to design more efficient and safer refrigerators. This business venture actually failed because of the effects of the Wall Street crash in 1929. Nevertheless, 1929 was the year that Leo Szilard published his seminal paper in the Zeitschrift für Physik entitled "On the Decrease in Entropy of a Thermodynamic System by the Intervention of Intelligent Beings." This paper is one of the most important in the history of physics because it was the very first publication to introduce the idea of information entropy, which is usually but incorrectly attributed to the American mathematician and cryptographer Claude Shannon, who rediscovered it, shall we say, in 1948. Information entropy is the key for estimating the minimum number of bits needed to encode a string of symbols, and therefore represents a fundamental limit as to how much information is communicable digitally in terms of a sequence of bits. Thus, an idea that is so fundamental to our society today, and possibly the physics of tomorrow, was originally conceived through the juxtaposition of an inquiry conducted by academics in regard to an industrial problem. It is an example that lies at the heart of the triple helix concept, an ethos that is perhaps well expressed by Wernher von Braun when he stated, "Pure research is what I do when I don't know what I'm doing or why I'm doing it." In this respect, just as the British government were forced to change things and develop a new infrastructure for technical training in the 1880s, as discussed earlier, now history appears to be repeating itself in order for the UK to comply with trends taking place overseas, such as in Germany and in China, whose growing technical dominance was catalyzed by Deng Xiaoping, shall we say, when he stated the following: "It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it can catch a mouse. Preferably a mouse with more than a Mickey Mouse degree." Thus, in the slides that follow, I will provide two examples of the many that I could provide that are indicative of the future of higher education, compounded in the new age of the technological college. In 2014, Microsoft identified the order of 100,000 technical programming and IT-related jobs in the UK that could not be filled for lack of appropriate skills in the UK by UK graduates. Consequently, and after significant irritation in regard to this matter, in December 2014, Prime Minister David Cameron announced the establishment of the first new college of its type since 1993. The Ada National College for Digital Skills opened its doors in September 2016 with the mission statement as given in the current slide. The focus of this college is to provide its students with the hands-on skills required to enter the digital technologies job market. The learning providers that work with this college are not traditional academics, but industry-based experts with a wealth of practical experience in digital technologies, from basic computer programming skills to current advances in artificial intelligence. It is an example of a new college that provides an essential contribution to filling the job roles of the future associated with the so-called big data society. The type of industries that relate to this society have and will continue to drive progress in things like communications infrastructure, data management and security, financial management and trading using the new cryptocurrencies, for example, new healthcare technologies and personalized medicine, renewable energy, and given the current COVID-19 pandemic, public health management. These are the subject areas that are expanding rapidly in the UK and beyond. The problem is that there are not enough properly trained graduates to enter this job market. And yet it is this market that is going to be vital in developing solutions for the relief of our planet. To deal with such issues as biodiversity and climate change, for example, the shocking details of which have recently been revealed in the 2021 United Nations Global Climate Change Conference. Another example of the new age of the Technological College is the Institute of Digital Technology at Bletchley Park, which has just opened its doors as of September 2021. The aim of the college is to once again focus on developing the hands-on programming and technical skills required by industry, where industry works hand in hand with the institute by designing the modules in their curricula, presenting the material, and tutoring the students who have gained apprenticeships through the Earn as You Learn initiatives. This is another example which reflects the UK government's drive to bypass the traditional university sector in terms of focus and funding. In this case, the aim of the college is to reflect the work undertaken at Bletchley Park during the Second World War, when scientists and engineers developed the bedrock of the IT revolution. For it was at Bletchley Park that the world's very first partially programmable computer, the so-called Colossus, was designed, built, and operated. This was achieved through the technical knowledge of a City and Guilds apprentice called Thomas Flowers, and not just the theoretical ideas of Cambridge graduate Alan Turing, who had previously helped improve upon the Enigma decryption techniques developed in Poland during the 1930s. Now, this is not to say that this new institute wants to inhibit its customers from contributing the originality of someone like Alan Turing, but its principal aim is to provide the technical excellence required by a society that has evolved to become reliant on the legacies of both Alan Turing and Thomas Flowers. The work undertaken at Bletchley Park during the Second World War is illustrative of the fact that both university and vocational qualifications are important and must be respected in equal measure, lest the distinctions between a university graduate and apprentice become poisoned through a clash between fantasy and reality, respectively. So let me now round up my presentation by presenting some concluding remarks. The crisis in higher education is compounded in what current employers of its graduates are constantly saying. And what they are saying is this, that while the cost of education to both the state and students alike is growing, graduates are increasingly unprepared for the workplace. Thus, both parents and schools alike must start to encourage school leavers to enter the university of life through earn-as-you-learn apprenticeships. This is the advice I'm giving to both school students, schools, and their parents. It is an approach that, in my opinion, should be nurtured on the basis of the following. 1. In the short term, more and more universities, at least those that remain in business, will have to offer fast 1- or 2-year degree programs that are predicated on an increasing recognition of and respect for a national vocational qualification. 2. Such fast-track degree programs will be integrated into online learning schemes, especially in light of the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic has forced the issue and shown that this mode of teaching is not only possible, but desirable, at least in terms of cost benefits. 3. The parity of esteem between vocational and university educational pathways will become dissipated and increasingly irrelevant. Now, of those 3 points, it is the third point that is the more difficult issue to resolve because of the social stigma associated with education that is not predicated on a university education, something that, quite frankly, universities have exploited to the detriment, often to the detriment of its students. On the other hand, if parents want to continue to do their children the disservice of limiting their future prosperity by being sucker to educational values that have passed their sell-by date, then perhaps they should be encouraged to do so. Why? Because it will provide a new window of opportunity for the coming technically competent proletariat to influence the future prosperity of the state. It is a prosperity that will be based on training provided by industry experts rather than tenured academic staff, whose mentality was molded by a society of excess that no longer exists. In addition to the new age of the technological college that is emerging, and in regard to the conclusions I have presented, there are many other industry-based and government initiatives that are now taking place. Some examples of these are presented in the following slide. One of Prime Minister Tony Blair's greatest ambitions was for 50% of school leavers to study at university, a feat that he and his successors took 20 years to achieve. That is now unraveling because of the entrepreneurial efforts of industry. This includes, rather ironically, Tony Blair's eldest son, Ewan Blair, who has just announced that his education startup company called Multiverse, established in 2016, is being designed to divert school leavers away from university into apprenticeships. The company was recently valued at £147 million after a funding round, funds that are clearly being diverted away from the traditional university sector. Another example is the recent pledge made by IBM to give 30 million people worldwide new technology-based skills by 2030 through local partnerships with education providers, government departments, and other organizations across 30 countries. It is a bid to ensure people of all ages have the skills needed for future roles. IBM will use both new and existing programs alongside partner organizations to teach people a variety of technical and workplace-ready skills. This is just one of many examples where industry has taken the lead to fill the gap between the stuff being taught at universities and the skills needed for the workplace. With technology advancing and becoming increasingly embedded into so many parts of life, it is important that everyone is given the skills they need to navigate the digital world. This is a case of history repeating itself, as I remember IBM having a massive UK graduate retraining program, which they established in the early 1980s in order to feed the City of London with the IT expertise that it was so badly lacking at the time. It is in this context that the UK government is finally acting through their current Skills and Post-16 Education Bill. Sponsored by the Department of Education and originating from the House of Lords, the bill is now progressing through the House of Commons. It is a bill to make provision about local skills improvement plans relating to further education, to make provision about functions of the Institute of Apprenticeships and Technical Education Qualifications, to consider student finance and fees and assessments by the Office of Students, and to make provision about funding of certain post-16 education training providers. In short, it is about making provisions to counteract the effects brought about by the irresponsibility of the university sector. Before finishing, I would like to leave you with some final thoughts and some further reading, which concerns how UK education ever got into the state that it now is. Because blaming governments, teachers and academics is all too easy. And my presentation is not about blame, it's about understanding. So how can we understand what has happened? I think it has much to do with the changes that have taken place in my lifetime, and very positive changes at that, which is compounded in the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, which was the icon for the collapse of the communist systems in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. The reasons as to why this occurred are numerous, of course. However, I believe that a very important one is a consequence of the educational provision that the communist system developed, for it produced a most remarkable transformation of society in terms of literacy and numeracy of countless millions. And perhaps it is because of this that the system imploded as it did. In other words, the focus for high quality technical education that the communists coveted was perhaps the very thing that brought it all down upon their totalitarian heads. As always, there is a price to pay, even in victory. The price that the UK is now paying is a result of dismantling much of the scientific civil service and the industries that were designed to maintain the status quo during the Cold War. Thus, the direction of educational provision has followed this quite understandable response to the end of that war. And besides, if top quality technical education was a reason, or even the reason, for the collapse of the very system that had introduced it, would it not be sensible to compensate for such a causal incident and accommodate accordingly? Now, what do I really mean by that phrase? Well, I'm not suggesting that there is some secret think tank in Whitehall whose advice to government has been to keep young people dumb and in debt so that they can be controlled, thereby staving off the embarrassments that the Kremlin had to suffer in 1989. But what I will suggest is this, that certain nation states who see fit to educate their children properly in STEM and are consequently experiencing considerable economic growth may have come to understand that it is in their best interests that certain other nation states are encouraged to carry on just the way they are. As I mentioned earlier in my lecture, in 1609, Francis Bacon wrote a book entitled The Wisdom of the Ancients, a wisdom for which he had great respect. In this context, and that of educational provision in its broadest context and spectrum, I find myself contemplating the following question. If education, based on the Greek view of life, had not been interrupted for over 1,000 years, between the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century and its rebirth in the 15th century, when pagan science lost out to monotheistic theology, then how much more advanced might humanity be today? And if this interruption had not occurred, would humanity now be in the position that it now is, where, for the first time in its history, it is having to contemplate the relief of our planet due to the clear and present danger that exists, for which humanity has only itself to blame? In his book, The Greek View of Life, Goldsworthy Lois Dickinson writes the following. With Greek civilization, beauty perished from the world. Never again has it been possible for us to believe that harmony is in fact the truth of all existence. It is in this context that Dickinson, dismayed by the First World War, evolved the idea of a League of Nations, his subsequent writings helping to shape public opinion towards the creation of a league, the ancestor of today's United Nations. The image shown in the current slide is a romanticized depiction of Athena, illuminating humanity through her quest for reason, understanding, compassion, and tolerance. This image symbolizes what I believe is the primary transformation of society that is taking place in our time and will be judged as such in the future, where humanity is reaching out to the Greek view of life. Since Sir Francis Bacon wrote his book on the wisdom of the ancients, Hellenism has been steadily re-emerging from the Dark Ages. Examples include the English Civil War discussed earlier, the French, American, and Russian revolutions. And in our time, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the abolition of apartheid in South Africa, and the ongoing civil rights movements, for example. But the single most important movement of all is reflected in the recent United Nations Climate Change Conference. This is because the effects of climate change are not going to care about our trivial differences and our petty disputes or our parochial identity politics. And there will be no compensation culture available to rectify the damage handed down to future generations if we do not reduce the carbon emissions of today for the sake of tomorrow and educate people accordingly. Some 2,000 years ago, in his famous book, Meditations, the Hellenist Roman emperor and philosopher, Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, wrote the following: "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." In this context, it should be understood that our current behavior is digging the graves of those yet to be given the privilege of being alive. And if we want to provide future generations with this privilege, then in my opinion, we should go back to the wisdom of the ancients, embrace the Greek view of life, and educate our children accordingly, lest they fail to understand the words of the great Athenian philosopher Socrates. There is only one good, knowledge, and there is only one evil, ignorance. In this way, those who might weigh us in the balance many years from now might be grateful to us for providing them with a wisdom that flows from the Greek view of life, a life that forged the greatest empire of all, an empire of the mind. I hope that you have found the lecture to be interesting and informative, and I look forward to answering forthcoming questions and entering into further debate concerning my thoughts on the future of education. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Francesco Petriccioni for inviting me to give this lecture. I remember well the discussions we used to have on education at the Adams Bookshop and Coffee Bar on the Westville campus when I was based at UKZN. Thanks for listening, and I'll now hand over back to Francesco.
Jonathan, thank you so much. It was not only informative, your talk, it was really fascinating. Thank you so much. You gave us, I think, some serious food for thoughts. Yeah, so we have to change our diet for our thinking. But I'm very happy to open the talk for questions from the audience. Please, if you have questions, I see there were no questions unless Ilya confirms the opposite in the chat. So if you would like to raise your hand, we will be very happy to give you the rights to ask your question directly. But maybe, Jonathan, while the participants think about formulating their questions, do you have some immediate thoughts? You know, you gave us a description of the future of higher education from a very strong UK perspective, yeah? Yeah. Do you have some immediate spontaneous suggestions of, you know, the South African reality, of how to translate your UK views to our South African reality?
Yeah, I know enough about the South African situation to give a few views, but they won't be based on factual relevance, which I have from what's going on in the UK for obvious reasons. I mean, I can say that when I was actually very impressed with the technical quality of the South African students I had, some of whom I taught, and some of whom I'm still supervising. I've been very impressed with the technical training they've had, and that training has come from the school system in South Africa and also from the undergraduate system. I'm only talking, of course, about STEM subjects because I obviously not taught and done research in the humanities. But compared to the UK, I was actually very impressed with what I saw in South Africa. I also remember, I can't remember what year it was, it must have been 2016, 2015, when in the sports hall in the Westfield campus, the Minister for Higher Education, Minister Blade, I think his name was, came and gave a talk to us, and he said quite clearly that he doesn't want to be a Minister of Education for just a nation state of graduates. He wanted more postgraduates, quite rightly so, because my point is this, that whether you get your training or education in industry and or university, nowhere, no country, no university, I don't care what it's called or its pedigree, can educate someone in 3 years when you do a degree. You come out with a degree, you go to a graduation ceremony and so on. That quest is a lifelong quest. It never stops. You are continually re-educating yourselves and retraining yourself to go into different job markets. So the point that I made, I forget which slide it was in the presentation, is that I see in the future, whether it's South Africa or USA or Canada or any other country, more and more students going into industry when they leave school, where they get technical training, but most important of all, they get some money in the bank so they can earn a living. And then there are plenty of good opportunities to do technical qualifications. In this country, it's mainly the sitting guilds and the national vocational qualifications, but you have the equivalent in South Africa. Then as the individual, having left school, starts to earn money and starts to get trained in a particular industry, most of all the soft skills industry and the IT, the big data society they're going to enter into, then they can do a fast track degree. So they can get a degree without necessarily having to be burdened by debt after 3 years, with the point that the degree may not be relevant to the job market. That's the most important thing I tried to get over in the presentation. You must make the degree relevant to the job market. Then if they want to educate themselves and qualify in other less job market related subjects, well, then they have got their entire lives to do so. So the point is, Francesca, in our generation, you did a degree, you might go to do a PhD afterwards or something else, but usually for us baby boomer generations, there were plenty of jobs available. I mean, I remember when I finished at Imperial College, I had more jobs to choose from than I knew what to take. So I threw them all away and carried on for the PhD. That is not the case now. And therefore, the whole system has to change accordingly.
Thank you, Jonathan. In the meantime, there is in the Q&A a sort of related question by Professor Anne Stark. And she says, thank you, Prof, for this food for thought. I would like to understand how earning while learning is actually financed.
Well, I can explain that very well in the UK. There are, at the moment, it's if I was leaving school, let's say I'd just done my advanced levels, leaving school at 18, and I didn't want to go to university, and I was recruited to, I don't know, let's say a software house or something like this, the 50% of the money to help train me would come from the government. The rest would come from the industry that had recruited me. And that what is also taking place is a similar reflection to what's happened in Germany for a long time. For example, in Germany, there's a lot of localism. So if I was the managing director of a German company in a small German town, and I recruited local German school leavers, and I could then prove at the end of the financial year that the profit I've made was ploughed back into retraining those the workforce which I had, then the federal taxes become much lower for my company. So in other words, I get tax exempt by proving that the profits I make are going to the retraining of the people that I'm employing. And so you get this feedback system. It's absolutely brilliant. That's one of the reasons why Germany has developed so well in the technological arena. Now, the reason I put a little bit of history into this, for example, in the 1880s and the development of the city and guilds and Imperial College and all that, is to show that it's happened before and it's happening now. And so not only are the government encouraging more companies to set up technical training in lieu with industry, they're also putting the money in to help them do it. And so at the moment, it's 50-50 participation. There is government money and more of it coming to help do earn as you learn apprenticeships. But the interesting thing to note is the more money the UK government put into that, the less they have to put into the university sector. So I don't have to spell out what the future is going to be, just in financial reality.
Thank you, Jonathan. We have some more questions. The questions are popping up now by Hussein Shimelis, and he asks, who is to blame for the unemployment of graduates? The higher education sector, industry, policy, or both? What are the best scenarios for a higher rate of graduate employment?
Well, that I tried, the very last part of the of my presentation, I tried to put that into perspective. You see, I don't want to go and blame academics. You could easily blame academics and say, look, you've not been teaching the right sort of stuff for the last 10 years. But they have been pressurized by the executive of the university, who have also been pressurized by the government. So it's a cultural thing. It's not about blame. It's a cultural thing. And that's why, having thought about it, the massive change in technical education, which took place in this country, was a direct result of the end of the Cold War. Because, I mean, why should a government train people like me, as it did, at taxpayers' expense, to go into the Ministry of Defence, and where I spent a lot of time, when there's no need for it in the first place? Well, it's just a waste of money. You might as well put the money into something else. But as a result of that, a lot of the technical training has become, shall we say, dissipated with the, I wouldn't say collapse is the wrong word, should we say the reorganization, the restructuring of the scientific civil service in this country. And many of the industries which were set up to support it. I saw a massive exponentiation of the technical services providing helping the Ministry of Defence function in the 1980s. There were jobs all over the place for, in a sense, defence-related stuff. And of course, the 1990s, that all faded away. It sort of went up in the 80s, Cold War finished, and then it all dissipated. And it's been dissipating ever since. So I would say it's a combination of things. I don't want to blame governments or universities. If you like, the reason is a change in culture, the cultural change, where we thought that there'd be jobs afoot, whatever we studied at the university. And it's led to the unemployment. But now, thankfully, finally, there's a change in culture taking place. And that's the basis of everything I said in my presentation.
Thank you, Jonathan. There are a few more questions, but some of them are related. So I pick just two last ones for now. There is one by Pardon, and he asked, the apprenticeship system coupled with technical colleges has been widespread in Southern Africa, at least. However, governments change that. In your view, how can governments reverse this?
Yeah. Well, by having a good debate in Parliament and getting some new bills through. That's why I discussed the bill which I discussed right at the end for post-16 education has not gone through Parliament at the moment. But if you go online and look at it, I think I put the link to that, you'll see that everything I've been discussing is actually embedded in that, but in a more, shall we say, politically correct and sensitive manner. But essentially it's saying what I'm saying. And that is not yet gone through. It's going through the system at the moment. But once it has, and I think it will get through the system because it's based on input from many people who've seen the interior of the higher education system, the way it's working, on the way it's not working, depending on your point of view, when that goes through Parliament, it will make a massive difference to post-16 education, the difference we want, where there'd be more opportunity, more government money for young people to leave school and start their career in industry where they are earning as they learn, earn as you learn. And then at some later date, if they want to graduate from a university on one of the fast track degrees, which will become available, many of them from very reputable universities in the UK, then at least they'll have the money to pay the fees to do so. And that will turn it on its head. So the answer is, this country, just as it did in the 1880s, with the Bismarck Effect, is starting to change its attitude to education. That will have a domino effect, and it will grow throughout the world, including South Africa. At the moment, what I find most interesting, I know about the German model very, very well, as I've no doubt you do, Francesco, because you studied in Germany. But the Chinese model is really the German model on steroids. That's why Germany is. That's why China is evolving at such an enormous rate. It's quite staggering what is taking place there, and that's because they have great respect for technical excellence derived not necessarily through the traditional university sector, as did the old communist sector where the Soviet Union was around. It was the same principle. They had respect for technical education.
Thank you, Jonathan. The interesting question keep popping up, Jonathan. There's a question by Professor Alan Matthews. What about the view that a first liberal arts degree is a chance to study interesting subjects like philosophy, physics, pure maths, and history that expands the mind, that is then followed by professional training, such as you describe would occur in a technical college?
My view is you do it the other way around. You get the technical training first, so you have a job. And then, as I said before, education is a lifelong quest. So the liberal arts, the music, which I know we're interested in, whatever you want to do, that can carry on in the background as a hobby, as something of mutual interest, or even a career change at some later date. There's nothing wrong with that, and it must be encouraged. The key thing, particularly in the UK, is to get youngsters not into debt for a liberal arts degree for which they then can't get a job and have to retrain in something else. Get them something they can get a job in, and then encourage them and train them how to educate themselves for the rest of their lives in whatever subject they take interest at the time or later in life. And of course, so much of that can be done online now. So you make use of the online facilities, and you do not just go into a company, say, this is my job for life, because it never will be. Jobs for life are over, even in the academic sector. And you evolve a portfolio, which, as I said in the last slide, is ultimately based, in my opinion, on adopting the Greek view of life. That the ultimate good is knowledge, the ultimate evil is ignorance.
Jonathan, the very last two questions. Ngobi Bopoto asked, many thanks, Prof. Could the gap in foundational principles from high schools also have a bearing on the observed level of functional illiteracy?
Can you just say again? I didn't quite get the gist of that.
The question, I just read the question. Could the gap in foundational principles from high school also have a bearing on the observed level of functional illiteracy? So this is a typical South African question.
Yeah. No, it's not just South Africa. We see this in schools as well, that there's continual debate and argument and irritation that certainly the mathematical and skills base, the teaching of chemistry, physics, and mathematics is not what it was some time ago. And to see this, you can just look at the exam papers from 20 years ago in, say, mathematics at O-level or advanced level, and compare it with what takes place now. So yes, I think there is that. It's got to be based more on rigor. We need to go back to rigorous attention to detail with more rigor and understanding in the mathematical and technical subjects. One of the areas of this, which I've always been harking on about, is that so many school children, they come out of school, they know how to play with their Xbox or play with their systems which are already on their mobile phone or whatever, but they don't have a clue about how to program them. Now, in the software industry, they want programmers, and programming is very difficult. It takes years of experience and so on. And it's as though the schools, the attitude, if I can make an analogy, it's like me saying, look, if you want to play the piano, all you have to do is put your fingers on the right notes at the right time in the right order. It's easy. But yes, that's all there is to it. But to actually get someone to do it and to be able to play the piano takes years of effort. And this effort business seems to be thrown out the window. They want something for nothing. It won't work like that. And it's a cultural problem, which is slowly going to change over the years.
Thank you, Jonathan. The last question by Professor Zurab Yanelice. In the less democratic times, access to university was limited. With democracy, everyone was invited to attend university, and eventually it became almost compulsory. If we are saying that universities are not really doing their job, that we want to go to the non-democratic times where access to theoretical, spiritual, philosophical education, as in the Greek culture, will be limited to few.
No, we want education for many. And one of the great technical things we have now is the internet. Education is you don't necessarily have to go to a university or to get a degree. There's so many online degree programs, whether it's for a formal degree or just out of interest. So we don't want to go down to any sort of totalitarian thing. We want more and more democracy. But the point that may come out of the presentation is that when Tony Blair in 97, 98 wanted more school leavers to go to university, philosophically, that was a very good thing. I think he made a statement recently, wanted 80% to go. I prefer 100, but I don't want 100% of school leavers to go to a university, obtain a degree, end up in debt, and then on the dole, degree, dole, debt. That's not acceptable. Now, one of the problems that it's very easy to blame the new Labour government in the late 1990s, but the reality was this: philosophically, we should have more people going to university. But the point is, there weren't the jobs available for school leavers to go into at that period of time, because the manufacturing industry of this country had been destroyed by the Margaret Thatcher government in the 1980s. So quite literally, there wasn't the job market for school leavers to go into, because manufacturing industry had been dissipated. That's something which we now need to revert if we're to compete with places like China and Germany. So I'd like to see a situation where everyone goes to university, 100% if you like, or goes into industry and gets a degree at some later date through the fast track method, but clearly leaves school and can earn a living, rather than, if you like, universities soaking up students, taking money out of them in such a way that they know or don't care whether they have employment at the end of it. That's no good to anyone.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I think this is the moment to conclude our colloquium. But Professor Jonathan Blackledge kindly agreed to join us in a few minutes for our virtual social event on the platform called Space. And I just added again the link in the chat. So just by clicking on that link, you will redirect it automatically to a less formal platform where we will have the opportunity to chat again for a short while with Professor Blackledge. So Jonathan, on behalf of everyone, thank you very much again for a great talk that I think you raised many questions and gave many people a very good reason to think about the future of higher education. Yeah. So Jonathan, thank you very much. We are looking forward to chat with you in a few minutes.
Yes.
Yes,
I've got your email, so I've got the link, so I'll be able to click onto it.
It'll be in your mailbox. Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much again. And tomorrow we will let you have the link to the video in our YouTube channel. So
okay, lovely. Thanks so much.
Have a good evening, and we'll see you just now. And to the participants, thank you very much for being again with us. And please keep following the NITheCS Colloquium. You can go on our website, register for our mailing list, and we will send you all the announcements straight in your mailbox. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
And I hope to see you in Space. Thank you.